Now, Borderlands is a series that I have always quite enjoyed because while I'm not really that big into FPS, I do love RPGs, and Borderlands is a unique mixture between those two genres. And back when the original was released, that really hadn't been done, and so the game ended up being a surprise hit with me. Then along came Borderlands 2, and despite being quite similar to the original, I did feel it was a marked improvement in many areas, and I enjoyed it a great deal. So I have very little bad to say about the franchise up to this point. But now comes along Borderlands the pre-sequel. So how does it stack up against the others, both as a sequel and as a standalone game? Well, the easiest way to sum up the pre-sequel would be that it's definitely more of the same, which is both a good and bad thing. Firstly, it contains everything we have come to expect from a Borderlands game. Tons of guns and loot, along with decent character customization, plenty of quests, large open maps, and a fairly good storyline. Now, one of the biggest things in Borderlands, the guns have seen some improvement, with the addition of two new types to the arsenal, laser and cryo, both of which are probably my new favourites behind corrosive. But besides the new weapons, combat remains pretty much exactly the same as the past games, just slightly improved upon, which, while still fun, I would have definitely liked to see some more improvement besides just some new weapon types. Maybe some dual-purpose weapons, like an assault rifle that is also a shotgun. I think things like that would fit perfectly into Borderlands, and it's actually pretty surprising that we don't have anything like that. Or even just an overall improvement to, let's say, the combat, by having a player be able to have more than one ability per character. Because my recommendation to getting the most out of the combat would definitely be to play as Claptrap, and this is because his ability can make any battle more interesting, because what power up you receive is randomized. You could deploy a disco ball that shoots lasers, or turn yourself into a giant bomb, all of which I definitely approve of, as it kept me interested during my time with the game, just because of all the crazy stuff that could happen. But compared to Borderlands 2, the weapons and combat have seen very little improvement overall, which is slightly disappointing. So the pre-sequel is set on Elpis, which is Pandora's moon, Pandora being the planet where Borderlands 1 and 2 were set. Now, Elpis brings a bunch of new locations to explore, and while they are similar to locations in the previous games, I definitely like them more, as they have more of an alien feel to them, and that leads into the game's main new mechanic, because since you are on a moon, there is no atmosphere, and so you have a new resource, oxygen, or to be more accurate, your oxygen supply in the form of O2 or Oz kits. These Oz kits are used for breathing, of course, unless, like me, you play as Claptrap, who doesn't need to breathe, but they can also be used as a jetpack to jump up onto buildings and glide around the map, as well as allowing you to perform a ground pound, also known as a butt stomp, when you're in the air. So this has made the maps far more vertical than ever before, and it gives you some more options in combat, as well as making exploration a little more interesting, as loot is still everywhere and it's a constant hunt to find new and better gear, which is probably my most favourite part of the Borderlands series. And the abilities of the OZ kits means that you now can have more hidden loot, as you're able to reach locations you never were able to before. So you must really search to find all the items. And this means that the world design, to me at least, has seen some improvement. But besides that, there has been very little change. Like I said, the locations are very similar to previous games. A lot of ice, a lot of fire, and a lot of big metal compounds. Why no forests or asteroid belts? Why not have a level inside a giant space monster? It just seems they could have done so much more with the new setting and still kept to their theme, but they didn't, which I think is a big missed opportunity. So backtracking, let's talk about the loot for a minute. So after having two games with the exact same loot system, I was hoping for some improvements in the pre-sequel. And while the character customization is still the same, I do feel it's good enough that improvements aren't really necessary. The rest of the equipment, however, is a different matter. While the loot you find can be unique, in most cases it's going to end up being near worthless. And while the grinder was a step in the right direction, for giving some purpose to the lower tier equipment by being able to use that to forge higher tier equipment, I would still prefer being able to dismantle the equipment myself and choose what spare parts I use to craft new things. Basically, I was hoping for a greater level of equipment customization, maybe up to the level that the character customization is already at. You know, swapping out gun parts to put on different guns. Because let's say, for example, I have a gun that has really terrible stats, but it has an awesome paint job. I could take that paint job and put it on my super powerful gun that looks really bland. But we sadly didn't get anything like that. And I hope we do see some changes along those lines in the next Borderlands game. You could maybe even make the guns upgradable or have them gain experience with you as you level up and evolve alongside you, just so we have some form of innovation to keep the looting fresh and worthwhile, as it's beginning to feel kind of stale. Now, I will try not spoil the story for those who haven't already played the game, but it is set between Borderlands 1 and 2, hence the odd name the pre-sequel, and includes for many familiar faces, such as some of the original Vault Hunters and Handsome Jack, who is the main focus of the story, since this is all about his history and how he became the villain in Borderlands 2. Now, while predictable if you have played the previous games, as you basically know how this story begins and ends, it was still enjoyable, even if some of the humour felt a bit forced. But that leads to my one big problem with Borderlands, the pre-sequel. Now, it has been some time since I played the original Borderlands, so I can't really say for sure, but the pre-sequel seems to be the smallest and shortest game in the series. It took me about 23 hours to do a near completion run, and while that is still fairly long compared to the average game these days, it's not as long as Borderlands 1 and pales in comparison to Borderlands 2, which to me is not a good thing. I know they said it was going to be shorter than Borderlands 2, but it's a lot shorter. However, while it may be lacking the quantity of the previous Borderlands games, it's not lacking the quality. Like I said, the combat is still fun, and the additions of the new weapons, as well as the OZ abilities and playing as Claptrap, kept me engaged through my time with the game. And the world, while being smaller, at least I think it is, than past games, still has plenty of large locations, filled with a variety of enemies to shoot and a huge amount of things to loot, so the core functions of the game are still here. Now, I have seen a lot of people call Borderlands the pre-sequel DLC, and while it may be shorter than the previous games, I definitely don't just look at it as a piece of DLC. But they do have a point to what they're saying, but how I would view it is more like an expansion. Yes, Borderlands 2, the Moon expansion. That's how I would look at the pre-sequel, but in thereof lies my biggest problem. The game isn't being sold as an expansion, it's being sold as a full release. And if the previous Borderlands games are anything to go by, there will likely be a huge amount of DLC for this game in the coming future that will require you to spend even more money. So where does that leave us? Well, sadly, Borderlands the pre-sequel didn't really live up to the expectations I had for it. When Borderlands 2 was released, a lot of people criticised it for being too similar to Borderlands 1. But I think that problem is far more prevalent with this title. It simply doesn't change enough. During my whole time with the game, I was never once surprised. Borderlands the pre-sequel is very iterative, and it shows. But don't get me wrong, I did enjoy my time with the game. But in my opinion, it's definitely not as good as Borderlands 2. And just in case some people bring it up that with DLC, the game will get better, I am comparing this to the release version of Borderlands 2, not Borderlands 2 with the DLC, as that game became better as well, so it's not really a valid argument. So in the end, how do I rate Borderlands the pre-sequel, and do I recommend it? Well, going back to what I said at the start of the review, as a standalone game, it's pretty good. If you've never played a Borderlands game, you'll likely not run into many of the issues of the series' repetitiveness like I did. But if that's the case, I would probably end up recommending you go and pick up Borderlands 2 Game of the Year Edition for a lot less as your introduction to the series, rather than buying this. And if you are a Borderlands veteran, even then, I would still recommend waiting and picking up the inevitable Borderlands the Pre-Sequel Game of the Year Edition with all 20 pieces of DLC down the road on sale, because for full price this is a tough sell. And with that in mind, my final score for Borderlands the Pre-Sequel is a 7 out of 10. Basically, I feel this game was just a bunch of missed opportunities, and it was also almost a 6 out of 10. And the reason the score is so low, just so no one freaks out, is not because I don't think the game is good or because I didn't like it. I just think this really should have been a $20 to $30 release, not a full $60 release. And I probably would have been kinder to it if the amount of content had been at the same level of Borderlands 2, or even Borderlands 1, but it sadly isn't. And it's because I like this franchise a lot that I can't just give it a free pass when I see it slipping. I will try to pull it up because I don't want to see it go downhill. But anyway, that basically concludes my review of Borderlands the Pre-Sequel. If it was helpful and you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel to see more. I will be reviewing a fair amount of games in the coming months. But regardless, thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a good day.